Peace and blessings, everyone. This is your brother Asar Imhotep with the Madu Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. I am coming to you today, Friday, the 28th of February, 2020, and today we will be discussing the Negro-Egyptian language family. And so I did a show yesterday, and I did one last week, and there was some sound interference that would creep up in the middle of the program. So normally I would have my other computer on so I can watch the chat and my phone, and I'm actually going to put the phone on airplane mode. Um, and of course, this other computer is off, so if the buzzing or whatnot comes, um, I know I can eliminate those things. So, however, uh, I won't be able to see the chat once I start doing the presentations. So, if I don't acknowledge your questions or comments, or see any kind of donations or anything that y'all have made, please forgive me. I'm trying to test and see what is the issue and what keeps making the that buzzing sound just randomly come in the middle of the program. So, but just want to acknowledge those who are in the chat who I can see at the present moment, and that is Zane Montego, Nesubiti, Amenhotep, Sister Jolanda, Sister Maika, Brother Tony Cha, Brother Chavez, and I think that's it for the chat at the moment. But peace to all of y'all who are listening live. I see peace to Brother Rujawu, who just came in. So uh, this is part of a series of concepts, ideas, arguments, issues, etc., concerning material that I cover in Aaluja Volume 2, a book that I released this past January of this year. So it's a brand new text, around 560 pages, roughly, and 8.5 by 11. So it's a large book, almost a table book, but full of information, full of controversies and arguments, and the whole nine. So, I've held off on a number of years to address certain things about Negro-Egyptian, and so I just want to kind of give an overview. So this is primarily for those who, who are interested in the book and or have the book already and want to better understand the Negro-Egyptian / Cyena-Ntu concept. And so I'm gonna give a kind of a general overview. There'll be some aspects of the conversation that'll be technical, but I will try to reduce the technicalities as much as possible. But do know, because this is an issue of linguistics, that just certain technical concepts, certain technical aspects of it cannot be avoided. So this is one of the reasons why, again, I'm doing a live conversation so that it hopefully I can better explain. So I should note that we've already had on this channel, on my channel, two conversations with, actually, let me see, I think I have three conversations with him. But at minimum, I know for a fact two conversations with brothers Jean-Claude Mboli, who wrote a text, The Origin of African Languages, which builds on Dr. Theophile Obenga's Negro-Egyptian. He's the one who originated the concept of Negro-Egyptian. So for a more fuller conversation on Negro-Egyptian, then I recommend searching on my channel, and I may go. Matter of fact, I just will go back and add those links into the description. But this is good, especially for English speakers, because our good brother Jean-Claude Mboli doesn't speak English that well, so it may be saying a barrier. So hopefully I can explain some of the major concepts of Negro-Egyptian, and the language won't be a barrier for you all. So peace to Rakim, peace Vela Vision, if I said that, or Vele Vision, if I said that correctly. Peace to Bedrock, Carter. Thank you all for joining the conversation. So this is a lecture. So y'all, get y'all something to drink. I have me some pineapple aloe water, and so you may hear me pause a couple of times to take a sip. And so got some random snacks in the back. So I encourage you all, to get something to drink and all of that. So I am going to keep my phone on for, let me see, what is my chat working? I don't know what's going on here. To see if anybody has any concerns or questions. So I'll just wait about 2 minutes, and what I'm trying to see is, will this buzzing sound come back? And if this buzzing sound comes back, please let me know, and we can get hopefully try to position the computer to somehow get rid of the buzzing. So peace to Kamal, peace to Solel. I think I got everyone else, but I'm not seeing my chat come up in this other thing. So we'll be getting started soon. Please bear with me. Just trying to make sure that everything is copacetic, as they say in the hood. So peace to Kiri, LT, peace to Donnie C. And I think that is everyone in the chat. So welcome to live chat. Remember to guard your privacy. Yada yada yada. Cool beans. Alrighty. So without further delay. So for those of y'all who are just coming, in the past few conversations that we've had, I've had this buzzing sound on my computer, and it just comes in and out periodically, and I don't know what it is. So my first hypothesis is that it's some electrical interference coming from these kind of peripheral devices like the cell phone, my other laptop, and stuff to that nature. So I'll be cutting, well, my laptop is off completely, and my cell phone will be put on airplane mode. So with that said, once I start the conversation and I start to share my screen, I will not be able to see any of your comments. So it's crosstalk with your phone. It probably is. So so I will put it on airplane mode, but I will announce when I'm taken off of airplane mode, just to see if the buzzing has come back. So I'm depending on y'all to let me know if the buzzing comes back in the chat. So I'll check it periodically, but for the most part, it's going to be off. So without further delay, let me airplane mode, and we can get busy. Alrighty, so let's do that. Share screen. Bong. Okay. So boom. And I guess I should make sure that the screen is being shared on the computer before I get started. So let me retry and connect. And boom, I see it on the. He says, someone can't send super chat. What's the deal? I have no idea. I see it at the bottom of my screen. Um, I have no idea. Uh, so peace and blessings, Black African power to you as well. So let me turn it back off onto airplane mode, and we will get started. So, as I mentioned earlier, this conversation is focused on the Negro-Egyptian language family. And so this is going to be a very important understanding to have to really kind of comprehend the direction that Africana linguistics, Africana Egyptology, etc., is going. And so I'll explain what Cyena-Ntu is a little later, but we're going to get started. And so, as I mentioned before, a lot of this is explained actually in two books, in terms of English, that is. My 2016 book, Nesubiti, there's a conversation at the beginning in the introduction concerning Negro-Egyptian, and then there's some added kind of updated stuff in Aaluja Volume 2. So this is the book that just came out, and the cover is what you see on the left. So if you do not have this text, I highly encourage you to get it right now, to be exact. Anyway, you can get it at my website, asarimhotep.com, at the top of the screen, and you'll be able to go through this material on your own a little bit more slowly. So I will continue. So, as I mentioned, that this conversation is a historical linguistic conversation. So you'll be getting some insights into the importance of historical comparative linguistics to the fields of Africana studies in general and history in particular. And so I just want to read an excerpt from this text here. It's Historical Linguistics and Introduction by Dr. Lyle Campbell. And he starts off the conversation. A topic of great current interest in historical linguistics is that of distant genetic relationships, and both the methods and the hypothesized distant family relationships have been much debated. Postulated remote relationships such as Amerindian, Nostratic, and Proto-World have been featured in newspapers, magazines, and television documentaries. And yet these same proposals have been rejected by most mainstream historical linguistics. How is one to know what to believe? How can claims about very remote linguistic relationships be evaluated? This chapter addresses these questions by surveying the various methodological principles, criteria, and rules of thumb that are considered important in proposals of distant genetic relationship. The goal is to prepare you to be able to see past the controversies by explaining the methods and their limitations. Armed with these, in their limitations. Armed with these, you should be able to evaluate proposals of remote linguistic affinity for yourself. And so this book is just a kind of a plug, historical linguistics and introduction. And I think this is a very good text for kind of learning linguistics. And I think it's in its, I know it's in its third edition right now. So this is the first edition cover here. But this same information is in the third edition as well. And so I read this to kind of usher in exactly what we're doing. So we're talking about long distance or remote relationships between languages, and how do we evaluate proposals and arguments discussing these relationships. It is within this remote, distant relationship context that Negro-Egyptian becomes very important for understanding African history and African scholars in our entry into these types of conversations. So, again, we're talking about African cultures, African languages, and things of this nature. And so as we see here, this is the demarcation of our conversation. And so we're talking about the languages that originate on this continent right here. And so these are the modern borders and countries of Africa, but it should be understood that these borders did not exist until 1885, during the Berlin Conference of 1885-1886. And so, a lot of these Africans in ancient times, migrated a lot, existed on what is both of these borders, on both sides of borders, or in these countries or whatnot. And so these modern borders have little, matter of fact, don't have any bearing on historical studies and things of that nature. When it comes to languages, we only use these borders in modern times as a reference for people in modern times, I should say. So keep that in mind. So we're in Africa, there are over 1,500 languages. And so over time, we have discovered that you can actually group languages by a set of criteria, which we will discuss a little later. And so naturally, for those who are historians, we want to know in what ways are human groups alike. So we look at phenotypes, we look at culture, we look at artifacts, we look at architecture, etc. And one of those classifying fields is linguistics. And the study of the categorization and the evolution of languages is called historical comparative linguistics or diachronic linguistics. And so understanding that there's 1,500 languages, it's a daunting task to try to group these languages together. And so, it's not that many linguists who were involved in trying to categorize these human languages. And so there have been a number of proposals in the early days, starting, for example, like in the 1900s, and then in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s and early 1900s is when you start to really see these conversations about the grouping and categorizing of African languages in particular. And one of these linguists, these pioneering linguists who recognize the unity of a lot of African languages that were far distant apart, was Dr. Lilius Berger. And you see a picture right here of one of her texts that was actually in English, that you can find in English, but most of her texts are written in French. And I think a few of her articles and things are in German. But she becomes very important because she makes the argument that the Egyptian and the Bantu and the Fulani and the Somali languages are all related. Now, in modern times, well, depending on who you ask, this isn't a very controversial argument. However, she made a controversial argument in the sense that she made the proposal that these African languages like Bantu, like Fulani, like Wolof, like Somali, etc., were the children or dialects of the ancient Egyptian language. And so she provided a lot of evidence that cannot be argued to be as a reason of chance for these relationships in grammar, in morphology, in phonology, and vocabulary. However, a lot of her arguments were dismissed because of that final argument that all of these languages in the modern times in Africa derived from the Egyptian. And so, a few African scholars have evaluated her work and recognized the strength of her linguistic arguments, but the weakness of her overall conclusion. And one of those linguists was the late Cyena-Ntu. And what people don't realize is that Cyena-Ntu was a student of Dr. Lilius Berger. She was one of his linguistics teachers. And so the arguments put forth, the overall linguistic arguments in terms of the linguistic and cultural unity of Egyptian and what they called Negro-African languages, was the brainchild of Berger. However, Diop, recognizing the weaknesses of her overall argument, adopts the part that is demonstratable by the linguistics, but does not adopt her conclusion. And so, based upon his own studies, he builds off of Berger, and in 1977 publishes a text, The Genetic Relationship of Pharaonic Egyptian and Negro-African Languages. And it is in this text that Diop demonstrates the relationship between Coptic, what we call Middle Egyptian and New Kingdom Egyptian, to the Wolof language. And so it is this text that really kind of becomes the pioneering work in African linguistics by an actual African speaker, in terms of categorizing, in terms of making arguments about genetic relationships. And so what we mean by a genetic relationship is that a number of languages can be traced back to a common ancestor. So just like in biology, how we in the modern times are the children of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, we share a genealogy with these individuals going back, however many years that we can trace. And so it's the same thing in linguistics, except we don't have, generally, the hypothesis is we don't have two or more parents. We have a common parent that gives birth to many children. And so Dr. Cyena-Ntu Diop here on the left, is one of those pioneering figures who sets this foundation for a deep and rich analysis of comparative linguistics. And what sets him apart from a lot of other, European linguists at the time is that the Egyptian language is the foundation, it is the foundational language from which we compare all the others, because it is the oldest written language in Africa. And there's so much literature that we can get a plethora of information concerning the language, the nuances, and things of that nature. So it's always good to have a very old written language for which is the basis for your comparative studies. So we can discern what is actually inherited from the proto-language and what is new innovations or what are borrowings from external African languages, for example. And so Cheikh-Anta Diop lays this foundation in this work. And so around the same time, Cheikh-Anta Diop is, of course, introduced actually some years later, because in 1974, he went to Cairo, Egypt, and had a long series of debates at the Cairo Symposium. And there he made some arguments concerning the Africanness and blackness of the ancient Egyptians. And accompanying him was this brother elder, Dr. Theophile Obenga from the Congo. And he builds off of the information that was proposed by Diop. Now, he had some criticisms of Diop's earlier work in terms of linguistics, and Obenga is the linguist out of the group, the one who was more formally trained in it. Even though he didn't get a degree in linguistics, he was still formally trained in linguistics. And so it is he who brought to the Cairo Symposium a number of linguistic arguments that we will kind of discuss in terms of their larger implications in this conversation. And so he expands on the initial ideas and arguments of Diop's 1977 work, and he continues and he publishes this text right here, where you see the cover in the center, which is the common origin or relationship of ancient Egyptian, of Coptic, and modern Negro-African languages. An Introduction to African Historical Linguistics in French. And so he is also the founder of the Egyptology journal, UNC, or Egyptology Review of African Civilizations. And, he is one of those great minds who have been able to put together a lot of the pieces to the puzzle, which is African history and African historiography and linguistics and the tyings of cultures and ideas, especially in philosophy and religion. And so in this text that we see in the front here, it is this text that originates the idea of Negro-Egyptian. And so in his Negro-Egyptian, as I state here, it's based off of the relationships between Egyptian, Bantu, Mande, Wolof, Nilotic languages, and Banda. That when he examined these languages, he found regular correspondences in the morphosyntactic, phonological, and lexical areas between all these groups. As a result of finding these correspondences, he posited a common ancestral language that gave rise to all of these languages mentioned above. this ancestral language he, Obenga, called Negro-Egyptian or Black Egyptian. And so he really wanted to emphasize the relationship between Black Africans and the ancient Egyptian language and culture. So he named the entire family Negro-Egyptian. And so this is his Negro-Egyptian in a nutshell, so to speak. And so we have to mention what he was arguing against in the early days. And so what you see on the right-hand side is the organization or the categorization of African languages into four large superphyla, which is in modern times is called Afro-Asian after Christopher Ehret, but is primarily known as Afro-Asiatic, and prior to that, Hamido-Semitic. Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Kordofanian, and Khoisan. And so what Theophile Obenga does is that he reduces the number of African language families from 4 to 3. And he eliminates the Semitic languages from the African languages. He keeps Berber out of the Afro-Asiatic languages, but makes it its own language family. And so we have Negro-Egyptian, which has the languages that were included in Afro-Asiatic, like Chadic, Omatic, Egyptian, Cushitic, and he puts them in his Negro-Egyptian as separate languages. However, he keeps Greenberg's Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Kordofanian and Khoisan. So just like in Greenberg's, Khoisan is a separate language family, and but he includes in his Negro-Egyptian Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Kordofanian. And so this is kind of a screenshot or scan from the text. You can see how these languages are, divided. So this is his Negro-Egyptian. It encompasses Egyptian, Pharaonic Egyptian, the written Egyptian, the Middle Egyptian, Old Kingdom, and Demotic, etc., and then Coptic. And then you have Cushitic as its own branch, Chadic as its own branch, Nilo-Saharan as its own branch, Niger-Kordofanian is its own branch in Negro-Egyptian. And so this is basically a cleaner version, but it's smaller than what you saw up there in the individual languages. And I don't know why I have this on here a third time. So we have to ask ourselves, why does Obenga have to, what was his motivations for creating another language family in Africa? And this is the crux, of it all. And so it ultimately has to deal with the problems of methodology by Africanist linguists. And so one of those individuals in the early pioneering days from the late 1800s and early 1900s is this individual by the name of Karl Meinhof, who's a German linguist. And he is really well known for beginning the process of categorizing and doing the linguistic work on Bantu languages, and noting that there was what they call Ur-Bantu, which is the proto-language. So Ur-Bantu being the proto-language. So that's the word that he uses at that time. And so, okay. So I'm seeing now, I have my my chat open now. So y'all saying it was buzzing again. And so it cannot be my phone. It cannot be my computer because I'm gonna go to another area of the house and I'm gonna see if it still does the same thing. Hold on. Let me move a little bit. I'll be right back. Turn these lights on. Apologize, everyone. Okay, so let me go back into the chat because my phone was off. It's not buzzing here. Peace if you haven't purchased. Okay, exactly. Genetic relationships. Okay. Again, I don't know what is going on with the buzzing, but it can't be the phones. It can't be my other computer. So I'm wondering if it's just a certain area of the house. So, let me see. Okay. So I'm just going to continue and let me know if y'all still have any problems. So as I was stating, Karl Meinhof is a Prussian pastor, and so back in those days, a lot of pastors were doing missionary work, and when they were doing missionary work in Africa, of course, they had to learn African languages, and so the more African languages they learned, the more they realized that certain languages were more related to each other than others, and so they the ones who created the first dictionaries for African languages and things of that nature, and and so he's the one who really kind of starts the Bantu reconstruction process, I should say. And so, but he had very racist, ideas in terms of his arguments on what languages would be related to each other. And so he was a strong proponent of the Hamitic hypothesis. And the Hamitic hypothesis is this, these dark white Hamites from Asia who came in and civilized Africa and then, gave us our civilization in terms of language and stuff to that nature. And so, he's one of those proponents. So you got to remember this when you're talking about Dr. Theophile Obenga and Shekinah Diop when they're coming up in the 40s and 50s, having these linguistic arguments. So in his text, Die Sprachen der Hamiten in 1912, these ideas, were present in the text. And so this is my translation from Mboli here. That the Hamitic group, which possesses the grammatical gender, a superior linguistic fact according to him, and which could have been spoken by Hamites, a mysterious non-black population, if not to be white, which would have been at the origin of lesser phenomena of civilization in Africa, from the ruins of Zimbabwe to the statues of Ife. So he attributes the statues of Ife, the Zimbabwe, and even the ancient Egyptian civilization to these mysterious Hamites that came in. To the Sudanese group characterized by the absence of grammatical gender and isolating typology, and which would be the language of the real blacks, the Negroes. And then finally, the Bantu group with the agglutinated morphology with its nominal class system would be closer to the primitive state of the Hamitic group. So this is the ideas that they were fighting in these early days in the mid 1900s that were permeating all the linguistic arguments. And so then there's another individual who characterizes the arguments from the time. So there's a linguist by the name of Jean-Claude who writes, when we reread the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact. Is that they almost never explain their theoretical support. They probably do apply linguistics in the sense that we hear this word today, but they are no more theorists and fundamentalists than one would find at the origin of new scientific hypotheses. So what he's arguing here is that in these early 20th century, that's the early 1900s, that you were getting all types of arguments about the categorization of African languages and things, but none were, for the most part, being supported by linguistic data. And so they were making non-linguistic arguments, just like the Karl Meinhof in the previous slide. And so one of those linguists that we put in this category is Dr. Joseph Greenberg, who was an anthropologist by trade, but he was also a polyglot. He liked to study and speak a lot of languages. And in 1963, he wrote a text on African languages and came up with those four categories which we saw earlier, next to Obenga's Negro-Egyptian. And so again, this Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo or Niger-Kordofanian, Khoisan. And so we have Austronesian over here, but these are languages that came from the Indian continent. So these are not African languages here, but according to the Greenberg model, this is the spread of these languages. So these is color coordinated to give you an idea of where the distribution is for these languages in modern times. And so he came to these categorizations through a method called the mass comparative method. And this is where the disagreement comes when, African-centered scholars look at his arguments and when it comes to the categorization of the languages. And so, as stated before, these languages and language groups, oftentimes part of the criterion for the grouping was non-genetic, non-linguistic. And so we have an example here from Joseph Greenberg's text, Language, Culture, and Communication. And this is regarding the Afro-Asiatic languages. So Afro-Asiatic languages are spoken by Caucasian and Negro peoples. The Cushites and the Ethiopians, Semites, are often classified as Caucasoid. The Egyptians, Berbers, and the remaining Semitic people are indisputably Caucasian, while the Chad speakers are Negroid. On this evidence, it seems probable that Afro-Asiatic languages were originally spoken by Caucasians and in some instances taken over by Negroes. So hopefully y'all can see the issue here. So what he's arguing is that Afro-Asiatic, the language phyla, originates in Asia by white people. And then they came into Africa, and then the Africans basically hijacked this white language and then spread the white language all across Africa to become Omadic, Chadic, Egyptian, etc. And that the Egyptians ultimately, what they're arguing here is that ultimately the Egyptians are Caucasians. And so this was published in 1971. So remember that the Cairo Symposium was in 1974. This is when Theophile Obenga and Cheikh Anta Diop went to Cairo, Egypt, and was making those arguments on a variety of issues concerning the blackness of the ancient Egyptians. These are the ideas that they are fighting at this time. Diop publishes his text in 1977 with his comparisons of Egyptian and Wolof, and then of course in 1993 Theophile Obenga publishes his text, which is primarily comparing Egyptian and Mbochi Bantu, which is the language, the native language of Theophile Obenga, but also some other supporting languages as well. So it is because of this that you see. This is the reason why Theophile Obenga named his language family Negro-Egyptian, Negro-Egyptian, the Black Egyptians, because he's trying to emphasize, besides the linguistic information that makes his argument solid, he's trying to emphasize that the Egyptian civilization, its language, its culture, its philosophy, its science, etc., was birthed out of the African mind, out of the Black African mind. And so this is the things that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about Negro-Egyptian. So I will continue. However, again, we're going to get into the problems of Greenberg and the problem of how he categorized these African languages is unscientific. And other linguists have demonstrated and have argued on the non-genetic basis of the Afro-Asiatic languages. And so, for example, you have Antonio Lopriano, who in this text written in German at the top in 1986 makes the following observations. And I have certain key things highlighted in the red. He says, in view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of the Hamido-Semitic languages, therefore Afro-Asiatic, goes beyond what is scientifically attainable. Even in the sense of an algebraic reconstruction, our comparisons will therefore have to renounce the traditional historical model of diachronic linguistics and instead will extend a typological approach. Here, the overlappings need not necessarily go back to a posited common Afro-Asiatic, but will rather represent Afro-Asiatic as a realized construct. Thus, Afro-Asiatic will never be a reconstructible language, but only the reconstructed sum of historically attested points of linguistic juncture independent of their origin, and carried out for the sake of particular investigation. This sum may be interpreted in terms of genetic relationship, Sprachbund, or aerial linguistics or allogenic relationship. The results of allogenetic contacts between the Afro-Asiatic languages will also have to be considered as belonging to the structure of Afro-Asiatic, just as much as are the results of genetic relationship. Afro-Asiatic can only be considered an abstract construct of linguistic features and not a unified system of linguistic realities. And so this informs you that Afro-Asiatic is not a genetic language family. It's impossible to reconstruct a proto-language of Afro-Asiatic. It is just a aerial grouping of features, of typological features. And typology has to deal with, it's an idea that is taken from biology. And so, for example, if we take like some surface features in human beings, if we say that all people, if you notice a group of people that have thick lips across the world, if you take that as a criteria, thick lips, that would make the argument that they are related somehow. outside of the general just being human. And you can't do that in biology. Just like you wouldn't categorize all people who have dark skin or even white skin. That doesn't mean anything in terms of biogenetic groupings. And so it's the same thing in linguistics. You can't use typological features, like whether some language has a gender feature in their language, or if they have a noun class system or something to that nature. Like none of these are criterion that allow for you to make a genetic argument. So we continue. So as I said, so this is Paul Newman in his article in the Introduction of African Languages, who states that language classification must be based on specific points of resemblance and not on the presence or absence of general features of a typological nature. Thus, whether two or more languages are tonal or not, or whether they have an odd number versus an even number of vowels, might be interesting from a typological or areal point of view, but in and of itself is irrelevant in determining relatedness. So pay attention to this phrase here, that I have bolded in black, from a typological or areal point of view. So we go back here to Lopriano's argument that this is an areal grouping, that it is not a genetic grouping. It has areal features and typological features. So he says that we have to abandon. He says our comparisons will therefore have to renounce the traditional historical, that means the historical comparative linguistic method, model of diachronic linguistics, and instead will extend the typological approach. So Afro-Asiatic is a typological grouping. It is not a genetic grouping at all. So it's a non-existent language family. So I hope, I'm being clear in what it is that I'm saying. And so when it comes to the models, the methods that Joseph Greenberg has put forth, here is one commentary on Greenberg's method as they are understood and criticized by white European linguists. And I have to quote white European linguists because there are some of us in our community who, when African scholars make these same comments, that we're being biased, that we're being racist, that we're not upholding to standards of science and things of this nature. We get all kinds of bias, charges against us. And so this is why I'm only quoting white folks who were saying the exact same thing for the exact same reasons. So this is the buzz is back again. I don't know what the deal is. So hopefully we can remedy this in the future. But the linguist R.M.W. Dixon, in his text The Rise and Fall of Languages, 1997, makes the following commentary. He says, for many linguists, such views, and this is pertaining to Greenberg's methodology, and in particular his Eurasiatic superphylum, fall more into the category of religious beliefs than scientifically testable hypotheses, about on par with claims that all languages have the same underlying deep structure and the position of the stars at the moment of our birth determines our character. And so what he's basically saying here is that the methodology of Greenberg is equivalent to astrology. So, you looking into the newspaper and seeing what today is and looking at your birth chart, and it tells you everything that you need to know about your future. It's pseudoscience. So what he's saying here is that Greenberg's methods and classifications is pseudoscience. And in my Aaluja Volume 2, I list a number of linguists who make the same observations. So anyone who is looking for, text to argue against the Afro-Asiatic, models and whatnot, and what linguists actually think about it, then review chapter 9 of my text. So the question is, what was Greenberg trying to solve? What was the issue that he was trying to solve using the mass comparison method? And you get some idea when you study the underlying issues of historical comparative linguistics. So there's an article, Convergence and Divergence in the Development of African Languages. And in this text, it gives a list of issues and things that, pertains to our conversation today. So he notes, Bernheim and Tania Kateva note that the most easily accessible way of describing the historical relationship of these languages is by reconstructing their genetic relationship patterns, as we discussed already. The multitude of African languages can be reduced to 4 genetically defined units, called families by Greenberg and phyla by others. These units are Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan, as we've mentioned already. There are various methods available to the linguist for historical reconstruction. The task of the linguist is to choose that method that appears to be the best suited to solve a particular problem. Which method is most suitable in a given situation depends primarily on the time factor involved. You have to keep this in mind. Historical processes that happened within the last century require different methods of analysis from processes dating back 1,000 or 2,000 years. So he says most of the work to establish lingua phyla in Africa, including that of Greenberg, has to use the method of resemblances, which is based on the assumption that in order to establish that 2 or more languages are genetically related, or to determine the degree to which they are related, one simply needs to demonstrate that these languages share a sufficient number of lexical and or grammatical items that are similar in form and meaning. The main problems associated with this method concern the question of how the notions sufficient number and similarity in form and meaning can be defined. So it's not even well defined in terms of the mass comparative method. Again, attacking the method of Greenberg here. And lastly, on account of such problems, many students of African linguistics consider this method to be of doubtful value, and some would reject it altogether, arguing that reliable reconstructions of genetic relationship patterns can only be achieved by means of the comparative method. According to Nichols, this method works reliably only up to the time depth of roughly 8,000 years, so 6,000 BC. So far, it has not been possible to apply the comparative method appropriately to any of the 4 African language phyla. So none of the African language phyla from Greenberg was established using the historical comparative method. None. And so the historical comparative method is the only method that you can use to establish the genetic relationship between languages. So if you can't apply the historical comparative method to any of the 4 phyla of Greenberg, then these are non-genetic, quote unquote, families. They're not families at all. There's no relationship to these languages. And this is the problem. So what Greenberg was trying to do, and this is why I have this highlighted in the red here, is that allegedly the historical comparative method can only work up to 8,000 years in terms of time depth. So the question is, well, how do we group languages beyond the 8,000 years? Where what can we do beyond that time period? Since allegedly the historical comparative method breaks down at 8,000 years. And so that was what Greenberg was trying to solve with his mass comparison. And so he creates these super phylums that extend all the way into 15,000 BCE, 20,000 BCE, just these large astronomical numbers, without any kind of proof whatsoever in terms of the relatedness and relationship of these particular languages. So Greenberg notes about the application of his method. The most effective manner of applying mass comparison as a method is a table of pronouns, grammatical elements, and vocabulary for the languages involved. And that's from his 1963 work, page 4. He then proposes the following table for 8 African languages and 7 glosses chosen by him. So he has 8 languages here, and then he has these words as far as comparison is concerned. So this is 1, 2, 3, hand and eye. Right? So this is, as we can see, like if we look into this row here, these 8 African languages, seems to be no real correspondences between these groups here. And so you might say that Toro and Tilo, look the same, and then Ili, but Mwe, Wate, there's nothing consistent here. And for the number 2, there's nothing consistent here. Maybe Bali, Iba, maybe we lost a syllable over here between these two, saying languages. And the same thing here, and the same thing here, and the same thing here. And so one of the major problems of Greenberg's method is that he doesn't account for the semantic evolution through time. So you have these words here for I, but you have to determine first the semantic matrix for all the words involved, because that semantic matrix tells you, what words will also be cognate. So they may have lost the word for I in that language, but they have the same word that used to be for I could be for to see. And so you would include that, in your analysis. But Greenberg never does that because he's not doing historical comparative linguistics. He's doing mass comparison. And so it's unlike what you see here. This is from my text, and this is from the chapter on the meaning of Kemet. And as you can see, when I'm comparing these 3 languages, that, I note the sound correspondences between the languages. I make sure that I'm doing 2 consonants in sequence as the basis of the comparison, and I make sure that all the words start with the same phoneme, so I can see the pattern here. So you notice that in Sumerian, these words here start with D, and these words in Egyptian start with K, all for the same words and their meanings. And so these are ideas, these are how you do historical comparative linguistics. And so, of course, we have more examples to explain the variations in the second consonant position. But Greenberg never does any exercises like this in his work. And so, when it comes for grammar, you will never see him do straight comparisons like this. So, like Mehmet in Egyptian, an edible plant and its fruit. Chimuma, fruit, orange, fetus. Mut, mother. Chimamu, chimawu, my mother, mom, maternal aunt. Pupet, a plant. Chipupu, foliage. Minminet, herd cattle. Chimuna, domestic animal. And so you see a reduplication here, but the point, besides the roots matching, you also see these grammatical features match in Egyptian and Chiluba. This kind of methodology you would not see in any Greenberg's text and between anybody who adheres to Greenberg's methodology. And this is what's problematic. So Mboli speaks on Greenberg's issues that we saw in the previous slides. So addressing that table that we saw from Greenberg, he says the solution proposed by Greenberg for this table is as follows. Languages 1, 3, 6, and 8 would belong to the Nilo-Saharan family, while the others would be members of the Niger-Congo. He also claims that taking other languages into account would confirm this classification. He therefore asks us to take his word for it because, as R.W. Dixon pointed out, none of the data on which he worked to develop his gigantic classification is available. On the other hand, facts drawn from other families by him classified are visibly related to the Nilo-Saharan facts, such as, for example, the Hausa, Chadian Afro-Asian language, in the word for chi, to eat, can be found in Songo, which is a so-called Niger-Californian word, te, to eat, for languages 3 and 6, or even Zande, sa, or one, and Coptic for Afro-Asiatic ye, I, for languages 1 and 8. So remember that 1 and 8 are supposed to be Nilo-Saharan languages. So if why are we finding correspondences in Coptic, which is Afro-Asiatic, for these Nilo-Saharan? And why are we finding for these so-called Afro-Asiatic, in these Niger-Congo, in so-called Afro-Asiatic languages? So this is what he is arguing against. What the African scholars are arguing against is that when we actually apply the comparative method, we can establish relationships between these so-called boundaries of Afro-Asiatic, Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, etc. So this is how we know that these languages don't exist. And so, I introduce again the African school. And so before I do that, Professor D. Dalby, who's a linguist, in his Histoire générale de l'Afrique, General History of Africa, makes this argument here on page 174 of the text. We will also have to wait for the very speakers of these languages who have become linguists to attack comparative linguistics in order to elucidate the relationships of multiple languages, neighboring and related or not. So, and there are other linguists who have said the same thing, that the reason why we have these errors of analysis in a lot of the studies of African languages, and especially dealing with relationships and nuances and things of this nature, is because they're all being written about by European people, and a lot of them don't speak African languages. And so it is situations like this where this individual is saying that, we have to wait for the African speakers to weigh in on these who are trained in linguistics. And so it's funny that you have a lot of us in our community who argue against the conclusions of African scholars who are born and raised in Africa and naturally speak African languages, and who are trained in trained in linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, and they are all defaulting to all the white European scholars, and then the European scholars are saying that we have to defer to the African scholars who are masters of their languages. And so thank you to Safa Rabah Muhammad for your donation. If I missed anyone's donation prior, I do apologize because I had the chat down. So this becomes important. So one of those African scholars that Dalby was looking for, that he awaited in 1986, is our good brother Jean-Claude Mboli. And so this is an electrical engineer by university training who spent 10 years training also in historical comparative linguistics. And he wanted to see if his native language of Sango and Zande were related to ancient Egyptian in any way. And, after learning historical comparative linguistics and how it's done, and he applied the historical comparative method to Sango and Egyptian, and he found that relationship, it made him want to know more in terms of his other language, which is Zande. And, so this got him involved in, and the reading of Theophile Obenga's 1993 work that we mentioned earlier, got him inspired to really tackle this in a very serious way. So as I stated before, Negro-Egyptian originates with Dr. Theophile Obenga, but there was a few shortcomings of Obenga's work. Again, one of them being that he included Greenberg's language families in there. So it's kind of contradictory if you are arguing against the methods of Greenberg to then adopt three of his other four families. So Mboli doesn't do that. He starts from scratch. He just applies the comparative method to a series of languages in Africa, and then reconstructs the parent language from there. And so to understand what the comparative method is, I know I've been throwing that term around. So we'll discuss what the process is. Excuse me. We'll discuss what the process is, in this slide here. So there's a number of steps that have to be involved before you can reconstruct the parent language. And so step one is to assemble cognates. Step two is to establish the sound correspondences. So what you saw when from my correspondences is that what we were doing. We assemble the putative cognates, the proposed cognates, and we establish sound correspondence, sound meaning correspondences. You reconstruct the proto-sound, and then you determine the status of similar partially overlapping correspondences sets. Check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of the overall phonological inventory of the proto-language. Check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of linguistic universals and typological expectations. And then you reconstruct individual morphemes. And so this you cannot do using the mass comparative method, because you won't be able to establish any sound meaning correspondences, because you won't be able to eliminate chance correspondences from your data set. And so this is very important to understand and to know. And so there's another thing we have to understand about the comparative method. And so this is coming from Michael Wise. And these citations, if I don't explicitly label it on here, they are definitely defined. They are definitely cited in full in the Aaluja Volume 2. So all of this stuff is in Aaluja Volume 2. The first step in applying the comparative method is formulating a hypothesis that the given languages to be compared are in fact descended from a common source. It obviously makes little sense to apply the comparative methods to languages that evidently aren't related at any reasonable time depth, and the failure of the procedure to reveal any regularity of correspondences would be a strong argument against a theory of genetic common origin. Thus, the comparative method, strictly speaking, is not a method for generating relationship hypotheses, but rather is a crucial tool for either confirming or not confirming such hypotheses. So this is a scientific method, and it is strictly here to confirm or falsify hypotheses. So if I have a hypothesis that the Wolof language and the Middle Egyptian language are genetically related, how would I prove that? That's when you go through these steps that I mentioned here. You have to go through all of this. And if you can successfully do this at all these stages, you have applied the comparative method and you have provided the necessary proof that Wolof and Middle Egyptian are genetically related. And so this is never done for any of the classifications for so-called Afro-Asiatic or Khoisan or Nilo-Saharan, etc. So this is what the viewer has to keep in mind. So we saw earlier the stages of there's no video. The stages of she's coming. I'll put it in the fridge. I'm sorry. Excuse me, everybody. I'm just talking in the background. I put it in the fridge. My bad. Sorry, everyone. So what you see here is the formulation of Negro-Egyptian based on the expanded and more deeper analysis of Jean-Claude Mboli. And so what you see here is that instead of how we saw in Obenga's text, where Negro-Egyptian is just the Chadic language, Omatic, Egyptian, and then Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, etc., that this is broken up into Negro-Egyptian archaic, the classical stage, which is the second and third row that you see here, and then Negro-Egyptian post-classic here. And so the Negro-Egyptian is broken up into three branches, and in the classic stage, he calls it Kweki, and in the second one is Kikwe, and the third one is Kikuki. And so what he says is that these languages, the Kweki and Kikwe groups, have been interacting for a very long time in a concentrated area. And as a result, these languages begin to converge on one another. It's a process in linguistics called convergence, where a group of speakers converge on one another in a different area, and because they have been borrowing vocabulary and borrowing phonology and morphology, that it becomes like a singular language. They become dialects of a singular language. And so that's what he calls post-classic. And then as their descendants move and the dialects differentiate even further, they become these languages that we know as Hausa, Zande, Middle Egyptian, Coptic, Shango, Somali. But as you can see above here, there was two main dialects from which these modern languages derive. And so he calls them the Berger dialect and the Berger dialect. And so we'll get into what that means in a second. So what he proposes is that the language family originates in the Great Lakes region of Africa. So that's Central East Africa over here, in places like Burundi, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, and all this area that you see. Hopefully you can see my mouse moving around. And so what you're seeing here is the migrations of the speakers from these two dialects, the Bere branch and the Behir branch. So the Bere is where you get Bantu, and you can see their movement from Central Africa. This is in contrast to what certain linguists believe, that Bantu started in Cameroon, Nigeria. So he argues that Bantu starts in the Great Lakes and moves here. So you have your Bantoid languages moving here, and then you have your other, like two different branches of Bantu moving in these areas here. So from there, Zande language, which originates in the Sudan but finds its way into the Central Republic of Congo. Then you have Hausa, Bambara, and then of course Middle Egyptian. And so the Beher branch, also originating in the Eastern African, area of Africa, they you have the Wolof language, Nuer, the Luo, the Songo language, which is his native language, and they have oral traditions about them coming from the Nile Valley. And these people migrated over here into the Central African Republic and places like Cameroon. And so you should know that Songo individuals were also involved in the slave trade. And so some of them were captured and some of them were doing the capturing, these Songo speakers. But they originate in the Nile Valley up here in what we would call upper Nubia, so to speak. Then you have the Zerma language up here, and then you have Coptic and the Somali, all originating in these areas here. So this is how he organizes this in his book. So where does Cyena-Ntu come in? So as I've stated before in previous conversations, Cyena-Ntu is my renaming of Negro-Egyptian. And I renamed it because there were several issues with the label of Negro-Egyptian. And so, as I stated in Aaluja Volume 2, this is just a direct copy from the text. The first problem is the word Negro. So the word Negro is Latin for black, and color designations on scientific linguistic categories is problematic. One of the critiques of the Hamido-Semitic Afro-Asiatic language phylum is that it was essentially organized or conceived in part based on race. So we read from chapter 9. So I read y'all that citation from Greenberg's text, where they made the argument that Afro-Asiatic was started by Caucasian people. So there is no correlation between biological race and linguistic categorization. We cannot, on the one hand, condemn the formulation of Afro-Asiatic because of its racial component, then turn around and label a revised language family based on race. It's hypocritical. So I'm addressing the hypocritical labeling of Negro-Egyptian by Obenga by renaming it Cyena-Ntu. Secondly, the word Negro is also a pejorative in English. So if you call somebody a Negro today, it would be seen almost as a cuss word, for a lot of us. So this is why, this label is problematic, especially for English speakers. And besides the issue that I named in the first critique, Negro isn't necessarily a pejorative in like the French speaking world, but it definitely is for a lot of people elsewhere outside of the French speaking community. So I had to find a label that was neutral enough but relatable enough to the data which these groups are categorized under. So Negro-Egyptian is also confused with the actual Egyptian language. So when I would try to explain Negro-Egyptian to people, they're thinking that this only applies to the Egyptian language. So if I, knock off the Egyptian, you can focus and understand it more so as a family, more so than the Egyptian language itself. Many readers introduced to the theory of Negro-Egyptian believe that it simply refers to the ancient Egyptian language when it refers to a family-related languages, and it again is referring to a race when the label is supposed to be a scientific category. While we do agree that ancient Egyptians were indeed black Africans in phenotype, culture, language, and temperament, using modern racial connotations, to be strictly scientific, we cannot categorize a language family based on the false taxonomic schema for biological human races. So the Chi-Bantu languages are closer to post-classic Negro-Egyptian. Therefore, it is a better representative of the parent language that gave birth to both Bere and Beher branches of Chiena-Ntu. And this is a lot of stuff that I kind of explained in the text. But the Proto-Bantu is really Chiena-Ntu. And these branches, or pre-Proto-Bantu or Proto-Bantu, is from that these other languages derive. So Ntu is a more appropriate label for the relationship between Chiena-Ntu and its daughter languages, and that is discussed. That is kind of beyond what we're going to discuss here, but this is exactly it's discussed in detail in the actual Aaluja Volume 2 in the introduction. So Proto-Bantu essentially is post-classic Negro-Egyptian, and so I'll get into that in a second. So this is my renaming of the language family. So hold on just one second. Okay, I am back. Let me take a time to look at what anybody is saying. Weird since Negro is literally black. We're not offended by black humans are weird. Asiatic black man, no rabbit holes for me. What the hell is going on? I don't know what y'all talking about over there. Let me see. Okay, y'all having your own conversation in the chat. So he says, how am I going to name it? I did, and yes, I'm a linguist. And I talked to the author, Jean-Claude Mboli, and so I had his blessings in the renaming. And when I gave him the criterion of why, he agreed. So, we end that conversation right there. So this is the restructuring of the Negro-Egyptian family. And so y'all are kind of getting a preview here. So if you notice the diagram on the left, it is slightly different than the diagram we were introduced earlier. So you see here, we have the three branches and the Kikuki branch here, and then it ends with a question mark because he hypothesized in his 2010 work that this is the branch for which Semitic derives. And so he's working on a text currently right now dealing with the birth and evolution of both Proto-Semitic and of Proto-Indo-European. So he based on his updated data, he reorganized his Negro-Egyptian diagram here in terms of its evolution. So what I did as a result, he would argue that Proto-Semitic is not a Negro-Egyptian language. However, if you were to pay attention to his diagram, there's no way that you can make the argument that Proto-Semitic is not a Negro-Egyptian language because it gives the appearance that it's just a natural evolution from the language, from the Proto-language, which is up here. And so I discussed this in the text and showed why it was necessary to also rename, because it's different things going on right here. And so I'll explain it now. So again, in Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 work, all of this will be called Negro-Egyptian, and he's probably going to keep the same label in his upcoming text. But I renamed the larger family Chi and Kanda that you see here. So this is a more simplified, diagram of what we see right here without all the details. So Chiankanda is the overall origin. So this is the origin of the family here. So we had Chiankanda Chikulu, and this would be equivalent to Negro-Egyptian archaic. So Chikulu is a word for ancient. So this is the ancient Chiankanda language. And so ancient Chiankanda or Chiankanda Chikulu split into three different branches: the Kikwe, Kweki, and Kikuki languages. So that's what you see here on this layer in this blue. So notice the color scheme. I keep the color scheme the same when we're talking about this evolution. But as you notice here, remember what I said in the previous slides, that the Kikwe and the Kweki group merge or converge on one another. And this becomes a singular language. And so it is this that I call Cyena-Ntu. So Cyena-Ntu is really Jean-Claude Mboli's post-classic Negro-Egyptian. So as we go back up here, so this is post-classic Negro-Egyptian, and it splits off into the Berger and Berger languages. So what I argue is that Cyena-Ntu is its own language family now, because you couldn't come from here and then reconstruct directly these branches. So these branches are the result of a logical implication based on the data of this. But you couldn't, using the standard method, get here as a clean, and be able to separate Cyena-Ntu into these three branches. So this is its own language family. So these have converged to become its own language family. So this language family, I'm sorry? Okay. Saying I'm buzzing again. Again, I don't know what starts the buzzing. I'll just have to continue because I don't know what's going on here. So this is why in this diagram here on the right, Cyena-Ntu has its own color. So this represents its own language family. But what's added in this new diagram from Mboli is he introduces us to the branch Kabed. So he is more firm now that the Kikuki branch, this third branch here, evolves into these ultimately into the Semitic. I left it out for you. Okay. I'm just sorry, talking to someone in the background. So he argues that Semitic ultimately comes from this branch of what I'm calling Chiankanda. So this branch is branch Kabed. And so the Bere and Beher and Kabed are words for liver in these respective languages. So Beher is the word for liver in Somali. Bere is the word for liver in Zande. And Kabed is the word for liver in Arabic. And so these words provide a kind of mapping, so to speak, a model for how words are formed in these respective dialects. So as you can see from this diagram here, pay attention to the arrows. The arrows are trying to tell you about points of contact. So when in Chikanda Chikulu, it splits off into three branches. Then branch 1 and branch 2 correspond with each other and they share linguistic features, but they're still distinct enough to be considered two different languages. Just like how the French language and the English language, the speakers have had contacts over time, but in English borrowed a lot of vocabulary from French, But just because it borrowed a lot of vocabulary from French, it did not lose its fundamental structure, and therefore we still consider English a Germanic language, while French is a Latin-based language. These are two different branches of Proto-Indo-European. So it's the same thing going on here. There's some interactions between the Kikwe group and the Kweke group at this time, or branch one and branch two, and so these forms happen. And so, but you notice here that at this first stage, there's not much or any interaction between branch 3 and branches 1 and 2. That's until the Cyena-Ntu stage. So the Kikwe group and the Kweke group merge essentially through a process of convergence and becomes Negro-Egyptian post-classic, but for us, Cyena-Ntu. And so the Kikuki group from branch 3 has interacted sparsely with Cyena-Ntu. So there's some borrowed words from the Kikuki group that we can find that says that there was some light interactions between this group. But the Kikuki group evolves into the branch Kabed. And because of the interaction between the Berger dialect and the Kabed dialect, this becomes, what is this called? Pre-Proto-Semitic. And just wanted to say thank you to Ramesu for your donation. I appreciate it. So this becomes pre-Proto-Semitic in the Levant. So all of this is happening in the Levant area. And so, but then pre-Proto-Semitic interacts with Proto-Bantu. And we discussed this in the text. And becomes Proto-Semitic. So Proto-Semitic comes from and evolves from two different interactions over time. So the Kabed branch of Chiankanda with the Cyena-Ntu branch of Berger dialect. So when these two interact and converge on one another, it becomes the pre-Proto-Semitic language family. Then pre-Proto-Semitic interacts with Proto-Bantu, and now Proto-Semitic comes about and evolves. So Proto-Semitic is its own language family because it has contributions from two other different language families. So these two language families contribute and converge on one another to become Proto-Semitic. Just like pre-Proto-Semitic is a result of the Kabed branch of Chiankanda and the Berger dialect, or some languages from the Berger dialect of Cyena-Ntu. So if you pay attention here, Chiankanda, Chikulu evolves into these three branches here, and Kikuki keeps going to Kabed. So Kabed keeps the Chiankanda. That's why the colors are the same. But here, a new language family forms, so I made it a different color. And then Proto-Semitic forms, and it's its own color over here. So I'm hoping that the colors can help you understand better this diagram over here on the left. And of course, when you get the text, it's made sense more in Aaluja Volume 2. So this is the structure of Negro-Egyptian. And so because of the relationships between, for example, Proto-Bantu and Middle Egyptian that belong to the same Berger dialect, you can see why there's so many correspondences between Bantu and Middle Egyptian, as you will see me post and things of this nature. But you understand why it's hard to make a Middle Egyptian and Semitic correspondences, because the structures are different in Semitic, and it's a merge of these African languages and also some native languages from the Middle East that were there from the people who first had the first out of Africa experience. So I will continue. So this is a color diagram of the actual Cyena-Ntu language. So as I stated before, Cyena-Ntu is the convergence of the Kikwe and Kweki, branch 1 and branch 2 of Chiekanda, and then it splits into two major dialects. So we have the Bere branch and the Beher branch. So notice that they are two different colors. But notice also that the Bere branch I have colored the same as post-classic Cyena-Ntu. Because as I stated before, post-classic Cyena-Ntu or Cyena-Ntu is the Bere branch is essentially this right here. So there was some differentiation that went on so this is the first to separate the Beher branch. And so the way that the words are formed, you can see the word formation that is different here. So you have vowel, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant, vowel, and then you have vowel, vowel, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. And so you see this kind of structure in these two different branches of the language. So pre-Proto-Bantu is really post-classic Cyena-Ntu. So pre-Proto-Bantu splits and becomes what I call Para-Bantu Bere, which ultimately gives us Middle-Egyptian, Hassa, Zande, Mande, and even Sumerian. And pre-Proto-Bantu continues and gives us Proto-Gabaya and Proto-Chibantu and modern Gabaya and Chibantu. So instead of just saying Bantu, I say Chibantu in the text so that we can understand the difference here. And so the Beher branch becomes the Nuer and Wolof languages. And we see over here it splits in two. And in the other branch becomes Coptic, Sango, Somali, Zerma, and Banda. So these are different branches here. And so there's how we know the split between the languages is the isoglosses that you see here. So in between two vowels, these consonants remain the same. But these same two vowels, the K and the T sound, they change in terms of the consonants. So the uvular trill here and the regular liquid R here. So hopefully this color scheme will help you to understand the evolution of Cyena-Ntu at this time. So this green, you notice that the green colors, these Chibantu is more reminiscent of this classical stage of the language. So it still keeps the same structures and things of that nature. But in pre-Proto-Bantu stage, a dialect branched off and then splintered off into these groups. So that's why its color is different. And the same thing is going on here. So the Bantu languages keep the same structure as the proto-language. That's why I call it Cyena-Ntu, because all of these languages are Ntu languages. And so Cyena is just a Chiluba Bantu word for belonging to or family or saying or member of. So this is the Ntu family. And so you have Chibantu, and then you have the Para-Bantu Bere, or the Bere branch, the Para-Bantu Bere, and the Beher branch. All of these are Ntu languages. So I did the Bere branch map over so I can include Sumerian. So as you will, if you read the Aaluja Volume 2, you'll see that I include a lot of Sumerian correspondences all throughout the book. And, we demonstrate, especially in chapter 13, that Sumerian is, in fact, a Cyena-Ntu, quote-unquote, Negro-Egyptian language. So let me break for a second and see if anybody's saying anything worthwhile. Yeah, y'all having your own conversations. So I'll just continue with the lecture. Hebrew, make the same exact arguments as them. Yeah, y'all having your own conversation. So I will continue. So the Negro-Egyptian, according to Jean-Claude Mboli, and remember that for the most part, I only changed the labels. The structure, let me go to back, matter of fact. The structure of Chiankanda and Cyena-Ntu are the same. All I did was replace the labels. So all of this is the result of Mboli. I didn't come in and restructure his model. I only changed the labels and made it easier to understand. So, what characterizes the language is, for example, the mother tongue. And so what he argues is that the very first stage of the African mother tongue, which he calls Negro-Egyptian, which we call Chiankanda, is composed of two switchable syllables, of consonant vowel syllables such as ta, ki, po, fa, etc. And so we see this kind of combination of consonant vowel, but they're two words. So what he's saying is that the beginning stages of the language consisted of this monosyllabic consonant vowel, but they created, a bisyllable word by the combination of two consonant vowel words. So that's what you see here. And what the reason why he has this, and this is actually from one of his slides, and I'm gonna post his slides in the description that you can download it, because remember that he had this discussion on my channel before. So some of these slides I'm taking directly from his slide. So the reason why he has this consonant vowel in red is because they represent stressed syllables. So in this word, whatever this word would be, the stress is on the first syllable. But in this version, the stress is on the second syllable. So each consonant vowel syllable is called a primolexeme. There are 10 such primolexemes that have been isolated in Negro-Egyptian, and all are onomatopoeia. So he argues that they are onomatopoeia words. So here are the 10 words that give birth to all the words in Negro-Egyptian slash Chiankanda and Chientu, and even Kabed and Proto-Semitic to an extent. So he says, ke, the sound of dry wood being cut, or the sound of crackling of a dry branch. Hu, actions of blowing breath. Chui, sound of the mouth trying to chew. Hu, action of smell, sniff. Hu, sound emitted from the throat. Nge, baby sound identified as call to his mother. Like nge, nge, if you ever heard a baby cry. Kri, a cry of shivering or to thrill. E, as the singular vowel, indication of remoteness, there. U, indication of proximity, here. A, indication of size, big, indication of far away. And so you got to understand that this is a very primitive state of the language. So, we're not talking about in recent times, in the last 4,000 to 5,000 years. This is very old. So you're saying from these 10 mono, and it's probably more, but he can only scientifically reconstruct these 10. And so he's saying that from these 10 at least, a slew of words were formed based on that consonant vowel combination. So that second stage, the classic stage of Negro-Egyptian, or the classic stage of Chiankanda, you see that you start to see these combinations to become words that were important for those Africans at that time. So, and at this time, they were hunter-gatherers. This was a hunter-gatherer stage. And so these words, when they combined them, they became words that were important for people who were living a subsistence or their subsistence strategy was hunting and gathering. And so we have tree, game. And so ultimately, when you say tree for game, that means food or animals that we can eat. So, it's the word. So the word for the sound of chewing becomes the word for game. So they all come from verbs, and then verbs become nouns. And so we have hu, the word for lung. So hu is the action of blowing in breath. And so they identify that with the lung in the chest. And then you have ki, hu, fire and sun. So K is the word for the sound of dry wood being cut, sound of crackling of dry branch. So the word for fire or sun is to blow on the stick, the fire stick. So kiku, javelin. What is the key? And this may come from, it's just a variant of key here. So now the word for key becomes a word for wood, or right here. And so, you see this combination of words being built. And so, your chief leader, we have to be concerned about the rainy season, the dry season, because we're concerned about food, clothing, and shelter. In our hunter-gatherer stage, we aren't necessarily, building religious temples or anything to that nature. Our concern at this moment is family, food, clothing, and shelter. So the first words have to deal with all of these different things. And so from there, again, we the words become more relative to our lives and things of that nature. So we're still in the hunter-gatherer stage, but as I said before, that ka or ki is a word for stick. And so the word for stick became a word for any object or tool or thing. And then the semantic evolution, because the stick is hard, it becomes the word for force or to hurt or dangerous or stone, because you can use a stick as a weapon. So remember that, we come from the trees. So biological evolution informs us that our habitat, our concern was the trees. And we see with these first words that there's a relationship between the trees and the things that we identify. We base everything on our understanding of trees. And so K plus U, tree, the lower part. And so the bottom of the tree, this ku here, represents anything that is below. So the tree is symbolic of the human being. So even our hair is a tree. So remember the conversation that we had yesterday on my channel, where the word for plants and trees is the word for hair in Egyptian. And they're telling you that their hair, the trees, the leaves and everything, the way that it's shaped reminds them of their own hair. So this is how you can tell about the blackness. One of the criterion for the blackness of the ancient Egyptians. But anyway, key tree, the upper part of the tree. And so for variations of this word become the word for the limbs, arm, to take, to horn. And so you have the arms and then the actions of the arms, the head and then the actions of the head, the words for foot and the action of the foot. So all of these that we identify with the human body are simply words for different parts of the tree. So whether we're talking about body, it's a word for tree trunk, or whether we're talking about foot or leg, it's the excuse me, it's the foot of the tree, the bottom of the tree, and then the head and the limbs and things is the branches and etc. So these are the things that we pay attention, and so you can kind of review this slide on your own, so you can kind of get an understanding. And so this is just a continuation of the evolution of the concept. So what Mboli is doing here is informing us of how, with a few words in our language, how we were able to expand those words in terms of their application, the semantic evolution of those words, and the formation process of words in the Cyena-Ntu or Chian-Kanda language family. So we can see the evolution here of this word here, kihu, or hu-ki, because remember that the syllables can be switched in the different dialects. So from this word for coal, for fire, it becomes firewood and then fire. And so firewood can become the word for coal, and the word for coal can become the word for black, and the word for black can become the word for night, and the word for night can become the word for yesterday. And so keep in mind, these evolutions are present in this current day in modern African languages. So this is how we're able to reconstruct the semantic chain. And so the word for firewood and fire becomes the word for light because we get light from fire. So remember that ki is the word for stick and hu is the word for to blow. So it's to blow on the stick becomes the word for fire, and the word for fire becomes the word for sun or moon or stars, etc. So we do the same thing with ku ki. So ku, remember, is the bottom for foot, and ki is the bottom for a stick or tree. And so it becomes a word for foot and ultimately to go. So the action of the foot, to go, to flee, to run, because it's the action of the foot. So the word for feet also become the words for river and water and rain and salt, etc. So when we look at, for example, these words in the Egyptian language, it proves this hypothesis here. So in the Zande language, we have the word hime, which is water. The changing of the vowel a makes it into the word for salt. And so you have the same word in Middle Egyptian, him for water, and then himret, salt. And so it's these types of comparisons that allow us to see the semantic evolution of the words in the ancient Egyptian language. And so you can look at the rest of this on your own. So this is a little bit wordy, but I have to read it. So indeed, the non-labialized syllable ki for the Kweki group and ki for the Kikwe group from the proto-words have helped rebuild these two dialects. So remember that we're entering into Cyena-Ntu and the formation of the dialects Bere and Biher. So it's helped to rebuild these two dialects, which have originated, as we have shown above, from a primal lexeme in the determinate position. These two groups have merely reduced the new trisyllabic words into disyllabic words, which have a more familiar structure. This has led to the emergence of complex consonants like Zande's labiovelars or hasaglottos. Having lost its contrastive function, the accent eventually disappeared in an area of each of the two Kikwe and Kweki groups, respectively, after which created the subgroups Kwe and Kwe, respectively, and their many dialectical branches due to the different realizations of the prefix of agent and the closed central vowel. All of these various varieties of Negro-Egyptian derive from the two groups discussed above and will greatly come into contact with each other over a long period of time, sharing many elements of their grammars and their vocabularies, and finally getting close enough to be considered a single language called post-classic Negro-Egyptian, which is my Cyena-Ntu again. So what he's saying is that, because of certain grammatical features and the position of the accent, it created these other sub branches of the Kikwe and Kweki group, and because they merged, they became a singular language because they all lived in the same concentrated area and been marrying each other, marrying into families, doing trade, possibly having wars, all of that. But the result of that, all of these languages sounded alike and functioned alike, and they became its own language family, which he calls post-classic Negro-Egyptian, which I call Cyena-Ntu. So going back to where we were. So to give you a hint at the kind of word formations of the branches. So the best way to understand it, so this is why, even though we talk about the two different branches, remember that they merged in the Cyena-Ntu stage. So you will have one language, for example, in Bantu, in Gala, this is Lingala, in Egyptian and Songo, you will have the same word from the two original different branches in the same language. So the evidence of that in all of the languages demonstrates that they all inherited these words from the from the two branches before they merged into what we see today. So we'll just take this first row in red as an example. So in Lingala, you have kuni, which is rich, and koni, which is firewood. But then you have kama, which is 100. And so these are built off of the same roots in the language. And so if you notice up here, Mboli has kwe. So pay attention to kwe ki and ki kwe. These are two different syllables that are switched. So KWE, KE, and then KE, KWE. So what he's saying here is that this formation, the kwe, in the kwe ki or ki kwe, when you see words with kwe, you see words with the syllable ku or kpa or g, p, b, f, m, or ngu or w, that it comes from the kwe syllable. If you find k, t, d, s, n, r, l, h, y, you can say this is j or yi, that they come from the k. So this is how we know. So we say ku ni. So remember the ni. So it's kwe ki that evolves into this. And so ka, ma, and so with m being the kwe version is kama. And so when they borrowed these words, so you have kin to be complete, fire, then you have kim to be complete, and black. And kono be big in Songo, kwe complete, kwa hair in Songo. And so, it would take a while to kind of, because these are its own lessons. So remember that this is just a overview. We can do a whole lecture just on this table right here. So, but if you pay attention, I'm leaving this up, for a while so that when, you can find a good place to pause this when you come back to review the video and see how the same word when the syllables are switched become they're both present in the same language. So Kulu in Lingala for leg, and then Lika to go. So remember, to go derives from a word meaning leg or foot. It's the action of the leg. And so the syllables are switched here because they come from two different dialects of the pre-mother tongue. So I hope this makes sense to everybody who's watching. The buzz is back. Again, I don't know what to say. It just does this periodically without my permission, and it is definitely annoying. So, let me see. So used to hearing it, it don't even matter anymore. Well, it matters to me because I want y'all to have the best experience, while listening. So I got to figure out if this is happening on any other platforms. And if so, what could be the issue? So, so, so these are the Kikwe and Kweki, branches and syllables, or the evidence of this in the language. And then you can see in the Bere, in the Beher languages, that they also have an isolating, structure that separates the two branches. So this is originally from Mboli's slide. So I recreated it here so that it is easier to see. So hopefully you all can see it better. And so you can see the syllable structure. So remember that I said that the word bere means liver in the Zande language. And in Somali, biher is the word for liver. And so you can see the structure is different. In Zande, the same word, the cognate for it, is B-E-R-E, meaning consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. But when we get to Somali, the word is B-E-E-R, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. And when you look at these languages that belong to these two different branches, the Bere branch and the Beher branch, you'll see that their words correspond to this type of shape of words in the language. So Bere, forest; Somali, Beher, garden. And so this is how we know, for example, that ancient Egyptian is a Bere language. And we'll get into the evidence of that because of the consonant vowel behavior. And so there's certain ways that you can demonstrate and prove that Middle Egyptian is totally separate from the Coptic language, because the Coptic language behaves totally different. It behaves like Somali. It behaves like Wolof. It behaves like the Nuer languages. And they all belong to a separate branch of the family. But Middle Egyptian behaves like the Bere. It behaves like Bantu. It behaves like Hausa, etc., etc. Now, I don't know what she's playing over there in the back. I don't know if y'all can hear that. But so you even see the examples in the actual Egyptian language. And so the Middle Egyptian, you can see, for example, Hebesu, garment; Iteru, river; Heru, Horus. And so we know that Heru has a Bere structure because we have evidence from the Akkadian language. And so when they transcribe Heru, is Huru. But in Coptic, they say Hor, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. It's a totally different vibe and shape than what you would find in Middle Egyptian. And so the same thing for Wep Wutiwu, or for word for messengers. In Akkadian, this word here in Egyptian is Uputi. Consonant, vowel, this is a prefix. Consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. But when you get to, this other variation, Upuut, this is a variant that is a characteristic of Beher. So you can even see, for example, like in this word for river. So in the Bere dialect of the Egyptian script, it is ITRW. But because the Bere branch, the Beher branch, so we can tell that this is a Proto-Coptic variation of the word. It is Itur. So, and then even in Coptic, you have this word Yor, river. And so it's these little nuances that help to demonstrate that Coptic and Middle Egyptian are separate, but that you can even in the script on occasion see where the dialect Beher has given, where the Middle Egyptian has borrowed these words from the Berger branch or the Berger language that existed in the Nile Valley. And so you have these things called isoglosses. And so isoglosses are able to tell you, the division of a language family. And so what Mboli informs us here is that, you can tell, for example, certain languages because they have in the intervocalic position, for example, the voiceless stop here to T, dental stop, that it remains T, and intervocalic K remains K. So Congo, Nuer, Swahili, Luo, Zulu, etc., they keep that intact. But however, Middle Egyptian and Bambara, Hausa, Sango, their middle languages, like if you put T in between two vowels, it becomes R. And you put K in between two vowels, it becomes L. And with this data, this is how we can prove that the word Ra is a dialectical variation of the word Aten. Aten comes before Ra, linguistically speaking. And I discussed that in the second half of the book when I'm debating the arguments of Dr. Wesley Muhammad. So this is just a better version so you can see more clearly the isoglosses. And so you can only get to this by doing the historical comparative method. You can't do this by mass comparison. And so it doesn't allow you to make these kinds of discoveries. So I won't discuss this. I'll leave it up here so you can pause it and come back to it. But this is just talking about the Kikuki branch. And so since I'm not going to be talking about Semitic or Proto-Indo-European, I'm just going to skip through this. But I'll leave it up here so you can, if you understand it, what it was exactly saying here. So, as I mentioned before, Coptic is considered a second language for Mboli. And he bases this on a number of arguments. And so, as we can see from what I mentioned beforehand, that's part of the argument. But there's other little features that you would have to know Middle Egyptian and Coptic intimately enough to catch. And so he says the home organic vowel I or E that was inherited into Bantu as part of its class prefixes and kept into Middle Egyptian, but not present in any of the Berger branches, including Coptic. So, Middle Egyptian Imen, the god Amen, this I prefix is non-existent in Coptic, but is present in all the Bere branches. But all the languages in Berger branches lost this prefix. So the very fact that you find Coptic without this prefix in its language is evidence for the division of Bere and Berger, and that Coptic belongs to the Berger. And so, and as I discussed in Aaluja Volume 2, Coptic doesn't even form words like you find in Middle Egyptian. They're just two different languages altogether. Middle Egyptian Bantu keeps the Cyena-Ntu stage, the proto-language way of forming words. Coptic, Wolof, Nuer, they do not keep the same process. That's why they separated and became a different branch. And so we can get into more of that a little later. So Coptic has also lost track of the nasalized volar trill. And so for those who, transcribe Middle Egyptian, you recognize it as this sound or this sign or the vulture's symbol in the script. But it is an R sound, it's a volar, it's a nasalized volar trill. After vowel lengthening or diphthongization of the preceding vowel. So for example, this word here, Middle Egyptian for soul or spirit, which is bara. In Coptic is bai. This is a diphthong. And this is characteristics of languages of the Beher shape. So when they lose that final consonant, the two vowels become a diphthong. Because usually the vowels, like if we go back to this slide here, you can notice how it keeps the long vowels, like yor for river, hor for hortus. It elongates the vowels when there's a consonant at the end. But once it loses its consonant, this final consonant, it becomes a diphthong. These two different vowels here. You will not find in a native Bantu language or any related type language diphthongs, because the consonant vowel syllable structure would not allow for the diphthongs. It would have to drastically change its entire word structure to get diphthongs. So this is more evidence that we know that Coptic is a separate language from Middle Egyptian. Also, in Middle Egyptian, Zande and Hassa are characterized by the equal accentuation of syllables, at least the last two, which allows them not only to maintain the consonant, the nasalized of trill, right here, realized as these retroflex R here, and the nasal N in Zande and Hassa, but kept good condition in Middle Egyptian. So this sound doesn't even exist in Coptic. And this is typical of the Beher languages. Like for example, the Collagen language doesn't recognize and has lost this, but they lost this at an early stage of the language. All of the Beher branches, but the Bere branches were able to keep it, and so it was in good condition even in Middle Egyptian. And so these are like little things that help you to know, and there's more of that. So since we're speaking about the nasalized of trio, and I should have made this capital when we write out the hieroglyphs, we transliterate them, in various ways. So capital A would represent this sign here. So you're supposed to see this graph here, right here. So just imagine this capital A is this. That's what it is. So I just didn't change the font for some reason. So from Qui to Gri to the sign here must correspond to the sound Ra and not R. Otherwise, we would not understand this role in the initial position of a word. So, in Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, we have this word here for bird, which is the symbol, remember, it's the vulture bird. Ahet, Rehet for field, Raru for long, etc. It corresponds to Sango, H, and so Hu for bird. Yaka, and it's a palatalization of the H. And so y'all should know that an H is also considered a vowel for many linguists. And yo and hio for to be long. And so by its correspondences in these other languages in the initial position, we know that it has the form ra and not r. So the syllable is consonant vowel, not vowel consonant. And that's very important for some other reasons that are beyond what we're talking about. And so indeed, if Middle Egyptian behaved like Coptic or Somali, both Beher languages, then the disappearance of certain vowels, W, the I or the Y, in Middle Egyptian would have resulted in the emergence of interconsonantal diphthongs. So remember what I was talking about going back here. So if we would have lost certain suffixes or sounds or whatnot, it would automatically create diphthongs that we see like in Coptic. But we don't get that in Middle Egyptian. So we come back here. So you would see words let me finish reading it here before I get on to that. So, in Middle Egyptian would have resulted in the emergence of interconsonantal diphthongs of the type of vowel u or vowel e, for which the scribes would have noted the signs w and y. For example, if Peru if we would have lost this suffix in a way, that it would have been switched into the middle and we would have had por. But you don't see that in Middle Egyptian with the loss of these consonants here. And so that is telling. And so it's a little bit beyond the average conversation concerning this. And so because you have to know about phonology and, tongue articulation and how all of that affects the the evolution of sound change. And so that is beyond the scope of this conversation, but I'm giving you just a general overview. I'm just putting it in your head so that, you can try to understand it a bit more on your own. You have something to research. So, again, I just put the same information again. So you see the formation of the different words in Coptic versus what you find in Middle Egyptian. And from there, stuff starts to make sense. So he notes that the Cyena-Ntu family is a family of classes. So as you will see in Aaluja Volume 2, I show where the classes are in Middle Egyptian. And it is because of the classes that you find that it's the inspiration for the so-called determinatives, the classifiers in the script. So the script, the classifiers, the classes in the actual verbal language inspired the classes or the determinatives in the actual script. And so that's a lesson for the future. But just know that Cyena-Ntu and even ancient Egyptian is a class language. It has the same classes to a lesser extent as what you find in Bantu. And so here's a class right here. Here's a class example. So on the left hand side is Egyptian. On the right hand side is collagen. And so you have a derivative noun class that is suffixed in both Egyptian and in collagen, and it's the T sound. So some would say this is a feminine T. It's not a quote unquote feminine T. It is a derivative class marker. And so in this instance here, sheep, the sir for sheep, in collagen is kitcher, is palatalized with a prefix kit. And the variation in Egyptian is serit, a particular kind of sheep, a secondary noun. And so kitcher yit, a sheep, a particular kind of sheep in collagen. And then we have the word for large, is hawa. And then it is uwu, large. So remember, collagen is a Beher language. So notice that how the vowels are in between the consonants. Bunyun, munyut, boom, amit, all Beher characteristics. And so you will see bin, bad, and then benet, evil. So you have it as an adjective, and then you have it as a noun. And so you have the same word in collagen, bunyun. So yun is a suffix. Then bunyut, and the enemy. Boom, witching. Bundit, and evil, the witchcraft. So you have here ham, eat, eat, amit, food, amit, food. So these are the same words in both of these languages, and they had the same grammatical feature with the suffix T. And so, more class suffixes in in Middle Egyptian. So these are prefixes are animated in singular and the plural, and then non-animates, and then the collective, abstract, and liquid class. So that abstract that you saw, in, so this is the abstract suffix T. That is the same one that you find in collagen. And so we're coming to the end. So people had some questions about like how Mboli was, marking, for example, this prefix of agent here. And so they're trying to pronounce this. And so I'm just showing this as an example to show you how, for example, he explains the evolution. So a lot of this you have to understand from phonology, and what sounds and what environments create other sounds. So, but I just want to focus on this right here in the front. This what becomes in the word nature, God. And so what Mboli is arguing here, that all these different words in these different languages derive from the same proto word, ni kifuki, which becomes kurwa, spirit of soul, which becomes okra in Khan, which becomes a quote unquote ka in Egyptian, in Middle Egyptian. But the word ka is the same word as the word nature, as I discussed in the text as well. And the word toro, spirit, but also imbasimo, imbasina, spirit. And this is the evolution, how that happens. But this ni, so you don't pronounce all of this is a schwa, so it's ng, e, w, and then schwa. So what is he saying? Well, how he's reconstructing it is that, in the reconstruction in the proto language, it can have either one of these sounds following the sound. So that's why he highlights it. He raises it up in these forms here. It can have any one of these. So they're not all at the same time. You don't pronounce all of this at the same time. Just saying that followed by yi, the glide, or ngu, the w, or ng, as far as the schwa symbol here. That proto reconstruction, it could have any one of these, and depending upon which one of these that is following the velar nasal, it has an effect on the environment in which it is. So hopefully that makes sense. And so just some more of his reconstructions, showing you that this is the comparative method, and how he's organizing, reconstructing the protophonemes. And so how I like to explain this is that Mboli's method is to try to explain every single phoneme in a word. And so when he reconstructs this nasalized velar trill followed by this mid vowel here, that this evolves into Middle Egyptian R, into Coptic, it disappears and becomes R, Sango Y, and Zande H, Hassa R or H, and Somali R. So from all of these, when we compare, the reconstruction that we get is this. But he not only reconstructs the first consonant, but reconstructs the vowel that gives birth to all of these variations. Because there are other formulas that, like if that same consonant was followed by U, then it would give us some different consonants. And if it was followed by A, it would give us some different sounds in these languages. So just keep that in mind. And here are a few reconstructions from the mother tongue. And, I won't go through these all, but, you can see the evolution into these modern languages, including ancient Egyptian. So with that said, that is the end of my presentation. And so I hope y'all got a little bit of what the Negro-Egyptian language is. So I will now be taking questions and going back to reverting from the screen share. So I don't have my lights in here, so it's kind of dark since I'm behind the light in this area. So Let me say this. You made it. My bad. You made it. It's made up. Good luck with your endeavors. I don't know what y'all saying. I had to kind of catch up with um, the chat right quick. So um, if y'all have any questions or concerns, I see y'all debating in there, so I have to go back after the show and see what the heck y'all talking about. But definitely, if y'all have any questions, and I'm pretty sure y'all do, if anything didn't make sense, and again, there's more detail to be had in the what do you call it? The text, Aaluja Volume 2. So make sure that y'all pick that up. You're welcome at the Melanite. I don't have any questions, brother. Just listening. No too much, and don't worry about me. Just do, y'all in here having your own debates. And so, as always, I invite if anybody wants to have a conversation and ask more so in person. I'm putting the link in the chat. So if anybody is listening and wants to add some commentary or whatnot, or have any other questions, the link is in the chat. And I need to put another link in the chat when I have some time. Saying, you know how, this is too dense. Gotta sit down with arguing in the chat is just too enticing. Yeah. This is something that you gotta kind of focus and pay attention to. But some of the takeaways that I hope, especially from the beginning of the conversation, that y'all have is that that the Greenberg model, the classification of Afro-Asiatic, of Nilo-Saharan, of Khoisan, of Niger-Congo, these are non-existent languages family. They are not language families. They're not genetic language families. They are phylums, and you can never reconstruct the proto-language using the comparative method. And the comparative method is what we use to prove the genetic relationship between languages. So without using that method, and we use that method because it allows for us to eliminate chance as a reason for the correspondences that, or the alleged similarities that we see in our correspondence set. So unless you are able to eliminate chance, you can't call it a scientific endeavor. So let me see. Yeah, y'all having all kinds of conversations in there. And so again, I'm putting the link to the chat if anybody wants to come live. Because if y'all don't come live, then y'all know how I do. I will definitely end the conversation. So for those who don't have the book, I'm putting the link to the book in the chat as well. Link to book, to Aaluja Volume 2. Aaluja Volume 2. And y'all will get even more dense work. And, so hold on. Asar Imhotep, the Khoisan languages belongs to Khoisan people. But you told me there's no written language. I don't see how that even. What are you saying? The languages for which Khoisan is supposed to represent has nothing to do with whether they have a writing system or not. They don't have a writing system, and so if the language is being spoken of, if the language is written down now, they have borrowed the writing script from Latin. That's what we've all done. So you're writing right now in a borrowed Latin script. So, but there's no African American script. if you are African American. For I'm assuming right now, but if you're not African American or whatever group you belong to, unless you have your own indigenous script that you are writing your own indigenous language, you don't have a writing script, so you don't have a written language. And so not only in modern times have certain people of different Khoisan clans started writing, just like in modern times, people who are Yoruba speakers started writing. In modern times, Akan people started writing because they didn't have writing. So, so as you reclassify the ancient Egyptian language, you're saying it is not related to Afro-Asiatic languages. If you've been paying attention, Afro-Asiatic does not exist. It is a hoax. It is made up in somebody's imagination. It's not a scientific grouping. That's what I read from the linguist at the beginning. And I made sure that they were European white linguists who made these arguments so that you couldn't argue that we're black Africans being biased. And if you purchase the book and you read chapter 9, you'll find a whole slew of citations concerning the whole language file. So Afro-Asiatic doesn't exist. So it can't relate to anything. That's just like me saying that I'm related to Santa Claus. Santa Claus doesn't exist. There's no proof that Santa Claus exists, which means that I can't argue that I am genetically related to Santa Claus. So I hope that makes sense. Even from the Caribbean, if you're from the Caribbean, then you are from a group of Africans who were enslaved and brought to the Caribbean, and those groups did not have their own scripts either. So go to the start of the show, Elion. Yes, we discussed this at the beginning of the show. Um, so yeah, trying to see if the chat is updating the same on the phone and on here. So again, if y'all don't have any questions, then I will end the show. And nobody seems to jump on the live. So let me say, Afro-Asia is a language family based on language structure and characteristics. Oromo, Somali, etc. are all related. No, they are not. And I already cited the citations which tell you they are not related. And there's no such thing as Afro-Asiatic. And this is coming from linguists. And it's not even up for an argument. Amber Evans, going back to the start to read Greenberg. We have Chizoro who has joined, and you're going to have to peace. I'm getting feedback, so you're going to you probably have another computer or a phone device that is on, so you're going to have to lower the volume on the extra device, the one that you're not on, or that actually could be me because I think y'all said I had an echo the last time I had someone on. So I will mute my mic and um, and let you ask your question or make your statement.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because they're having a debate right now about the Fulani. A lot of the kings now are saying that they're Afro-Asiatic, and they're using like language groups to basically discriminate. It's getting pretty intense right now. So I tuned in. I'm very interested to hear Afro-Asiatic is a hoax. Can you hear me? Oh no. Oh,
Oh, my bad. I forgot I had my mic muted. Yeah, I was saying I could hear you, but you broke up on the latter part. And so, if you could repeat that last part.
I was saying they're having like a linguistic debates in Nigeria. A lot of the kings now they're entering linguistics, and they're saying they're kind of getting into xenophobia, I think, where they're saying like the Fulani aren't original Africans, they're Afro. Hello.
Yeah. If you can pause, if you can mute your mic, because when when I talk, it echoes. So, well, I'll just mute you. So I just muted you. So, uh, so yeah, that wouldn't make sense because the Hausa who live in Nigeria, they also are quote unquote Afro-Asiatic speakers, or they at least put Afro-Asiatic. Excuse me, they put Hausa in Afro-Asiatic as a Chadic language. So if they were making that argument, then you would have to argue that the Hausa aren't Africans either, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm pretty sure that these kings are not linguists at all, and they're not making a linguistic argument. And especially since Fulani is so-called quote unquote Niger Congo, another non-existent language family. And so this is personal xenophobia, that they're just looking for something to differentiate themselves and to deal with some long-standing issues that the Fulani have been having with other Nigerians for centuries. And so that's a whole different conversation in of itself. So I'll let you respond and I'll mute my mic. I muted my mic so you can respond.
Yeah, that's basically what I thought. But you said it better than I could. Uh, Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Alrighty. Unless you have another statement or question, let me see if there's anything in the. I said I went mute. Yeah. He's saying that Afro-Asiatic doesn't exist, although the languages classified as such are related under a few branches. The scope of that, of demonstrating the relationship between these languages, is beyond what we can do right here, right now. But this is one of the reasons why I cited where they demonstrate that, where the linguists have stated that if to use the comparative method, we cannot prove the genetic unit of Afro-Asiatic, meaning it's a non-genetic family. And they're saying it's a non-genetic family. And so you would have to understand, what does it mean to be a genetic family in the linguistic sense, and how do you go about proving it? And so this is why at the beginning of the conversation, I list the steps in the historical comparative method, so that even though you don't understand necessarily the process, you know what is involved and what you have to do. So in order for anyone to make the argument that Afro-Asiatic is a valid language construct, then they would have to go through all of those steps in terms of um, lining up the putative cognates, establishing the sound meaning correspondences, reconstructing the morphology, reconstructing the grammar, reconstructing the phonology of the entire family, and then giving the criterion of what makes a language belong to that family. If you don't have a reconstruction of a language family, you don't have any criteria to say what languages belongs in the family or not. And so this is what people fail to realize. There is no reconstruction. There was an attempt in 1995 by Dr. Christopher Ehret, But all of his reconstructions, his so-called Afro-Asiatic reconstructions, were just comparisons of reconstructions. And again, the scope of why that is problematic is beyond, like, I would have to go step by step, with you to help explain why that is problematic. And so you can never, you don't compare reconstructions to reconstructions. You compare the words, the actual words in the language, to actual words in another language. Now, if you want to test a reconstruction, you can test that series of reconstructions with a slew of other languages, but you don't do reconstruction, 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 and then try to recreate the language family beyond, what the comparative method can do using that method. So that's why no one accepts the Afro-Asiatic reconstructions or the Nilo-Saharan reconstructions by Christopher Ehret, because the methodology is just wrong. So, okay, Kushite, Black Arabia, that's Asiatic, all in the Horn, this stretch to Tanzania. Don't know what conversation y'all having over there. The Khoisan people is 22,000 years old. Would you call that modern? 22,000 years of age is modern humans from a biological standpoint. Remember that Homo sapiens sapiens is like 300,000 years old, And so if you're talking about the genus Homo, is at least 1,000,000 something years old. So 22,000 is really relatively recent in human evolutionary history. So, is there anything else? I'm going to put the link to the book once again. And so, please, everybody, share this with your friends and family. I'm going to end up writing an entry for Wikipedia for Negro-Egyptian, because I saw someone tried to write it and it's just all messed up, how they try to articulate and argue against certain things for Negro-Egyptian, clearly for these folks who've never read the text. So look for that in the future. Yes, I've been to Africa. Cushitic languages are clearly related. Semitic languages are clearly related. Berber languages are clearly related. Clearly related to who? Based on what? You provide us the text, with the basic vocabulary comparisons. But so as it's, there's nothing going on as far as the chat, as far as questions are concerned. I appreciate all of you. Thanks to y'all for listening, those who are listening live, and those who are in the chat, and those who are looking at it from the archives. Appreciate and love you all. So please share with your family. Thanks to those who made donations tonight. If I didn't catch you and shout out your name, I do apologize. Again, I couldn't see the chat at certain points of the conversation. But please visit my website at www.asarimhotep.com for all kinds of updates, speaking updates and things. My next trip will be to Los Angeles, and I will be at the ASCAC conference. And the presentation that I will be doing is on the borrowing of the word Allah in Semitic from the ancient Egyptians. So that will be my discussion in LA in between April 2nd and April 5th of this year. So look for me out in LA. And again, go to the website, get a hold of the book. The book is very detailed. It's very chock full of information, and it will you will have a lot to think about, to say the least. So I appreciate you all. I thank you all for viewing, and with my long goodbyes. Oh, I want to say, want to give Brother Chizoro the last word. And so, if you have anything to say, you can say it now.
No, just thanks for having me on, and look forward to.
All right, I appreciate it. So, with that, y'all have a blessed night. Someone said that Brother Unk is having a show right now, so I'll probably go hop over there and start some mess. So, I'll see y'all on the internet. All right, peace.